everyone, and welcome to the Grandmaster Lecture. I'm very happy about these lectures because I get to choose what the content of the lecture is going to be about. And I think the biggest story in the world of chess today is the extraordinary success of a 22-year-old Fabiano Caruana. If you look at his rating, he's had one of these things that we all just dream about. His rating just keeps going up and up and up and up. And there's never really been, there's been a few relatively short periods where he's rather flatlined, but what has been extraordinary is his continued progress. And about, I was going to say 8 months ago, 6 months ago, start of the year, what will you? I was thinking that we're going to be seeing the era of Magnus Carlsen. Full stop, end of story. Magnus has simply been magnificent. He's been the world's #1 player in the world through, I'm going to guesstimate, 4 years, maybe even 5, possibly longer. He won the World Championship against Viswanathan in an absolutely convincing style. He won the match undefeated, which is about as convincing as you could possibly be. His gap between his nearest rival and his nearest rival for the last 2 or 3 years had been Levon Aronian of Armenia. And the gap between them was well over 80 rating points. So Magnus looked fantastic. I was thinking, gosh, I would be shocked if we didn't see Magnus dominating chess for the next decade. Magnus himself is very young, 23-ish, there's about. That sounds right. Several years younger than Levon Aronian. And so, my goodness, you know, sky's the limit. What will this guy do? Reset all the record books? He surpassed Garry Kasparov's highest peak rating ever, and he very rarely, if ever, loses, as for example, his match with Vichy. So again, you know, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, 10 months ago, you know, who was going to challenge Magnus? I would ask rhetorically, I don't know. Who's going to challenge Magnus? It looks like a layup. The guy's just unbeatable. Then along comes Fabiano Caruana, making his steady progress. In the month of August, we had here in St. Louis the Sinquefield Cup. Fantastic tournament. Easily one of the most enjoyable events I've ever been a part of. I was proud to say I was really a part of the history here. I was one of the commentators along with Jennifer and Maurice for the Sinquefield Cup, and every day, I am not kidding, every single day we would come in and there was only one question. Our whole show got taken over by the question. The streak. Fabiano had a streak. He won his first game in the Sinquefield Cup, his second, not too bad, his third, whoa, this is amazing, his fourth, okay, this is completely ridiculous, his fifth, it's off the chart. Let's start analyzing the history and who had the greatest results ever. Sixth, seventh, and he took over our entire show. Fabiano Caruana at the end of the event was clear first, 8.5 out of 10. He won his first 7 games, was winning in the 8th and 9th games. Those 2 games were drawn, and he drew the final game to score his final 8.5. He leapfrogged over Levon Aronian, became the #2 player in the world. When he left St. Louis, the gap was about 40 rating points or thereabout. In other words, he had halved the distance between Magnus at #1 and Magnus's near rival #2 was suddenly only 40 points. He went to Bilbao in Spain, where he was playing for a club there in a major tournament, and he gained 15 rating points. It's like, whoa, completely unstoppable. Closing the gap yet again to a very, very narrow margin. I think it's now, at that point, about 25 points. He, Fabiano Caruana, is now in a Grand Prix tournament, a FIDE Grand Prix tournament in Azerbaijan, in the capital city of Baku, where he's doing extremely well, yet again. And the whole story these days in the world of chess is unstoppable Caruana. He's just doing magnificent, magnificent things. At this moment, gosh, I didn't see today's results, but at the moment that I meant to be lecturing, he was tied for first with Boris Gelfand at +2 after 5 rounds of play, meaning that he has scored 2 victories more than defeats. He doesn't have any losses, so he has 2 wins and 3 draws after 5 rounds, giving him a score of 3.5 out of 5. He's gained yet again an additional 5 points, and I believe he's now somewhere in the vicinity of a mere 15-point difference between himself and Magnus. His opponent for this game, again, is being played in Azerbaijan, in the capital city of Azerbaijan, Baku. And his opponent is the highest rated Azerbaijani player. I'm going to make an attempt to describe his name. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. For obvious reasons, we call him Shaq. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov is Azerbaijan's top-rated chess player in the world's top 10 at 27.64. Fabiano was white, and Fabiano opened d4. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, and we get arguably the most popular defense at the highest levels of chess, the Slav. Interestingly enough, when I was very young, I played the Slav defense as black, left it for other pastures, Queen's Gambit accepted, Queen's Gambit declined, etc., etc. In 2012, I had a match against former world champion Anatoly Karpov, and when I was analyzing Karpov's games in preparation for the match, I decided to play the Slav defense as black as well. And Anatoly always likes this setup, and on his 4th move, he, as a near religious experience, plays e3, and this is the position I prepared for as black, and it's what Fabiano played as well. Bishop g4, well, it's clear that with these 2 pawns on c6 and d5, and in anticipation of being able to play e7, e6, black would like to rid himself of the bishop, the light-squared bishop, before it becomes passively placed behind his pawns after e7, e6. So bishop g4, the most popular move for black. Knight c3, developing a piece, e7, e6. So we see instantly our understanding is very clear that the bishop on c8 is outside of the pawn chain. It's very active there. Away we go. So from white's point of view, his position has 2 defects, which I tried to exploit when I played with Anatoly Karpov. 2 defects. The first is, well, whether it's terrible or not, that knight is in a pin, and as much as the knight would like to go, for example, to the square e5, well, at the moment we're in a pin and we can't do that. The second slight defect is that the bishop on c1 is impeded by its own pawn on e3, unlike black, who was clever enough to bring his bishop outside of his pawn chain. White was less clever. But there are very specific reasons why white players, including Anatoly Karpov, like this position for white, and it starts with the move queen b3. Give me the pawn, give me the rook. So queen b3, it breaks the pin with a gain of tempo against the pawn on b7. This position has been played in, I'm going to say, numerous Grandmaster games, and queen b6 is the most popular way of meeting this threat of queen takes b7. Fair enough. Now, knight h4 has recently become an extremely popular move, and that is the move that Caruana, in fact, played. It looks a little strange, knight h4. I mean, the most direct move, for example, is knight to e5. Now that the pin is broken, why not bring the knight, centralize it in the middle of the board? Very natural move. Also, opening up the possibility of knight captures the bishop on g4. The reason is that as attractive as this move appears to be, the knight in the middle of the board makes a very impressive sight. After the move bishop h5, it's strange, but the knight actually becomes a target for black's pieces. Black is preparing to play the move knight on b8 to d7 to just simply try to trade this knight off the board. And after, for example, knight b8 to d7, if you trade, he recaptures and nothing special has happened. In the meanwhile, you still, that is to say white, has not yet solved the question of what does he intend to do with his bishop on c1. Is it going to go to d2? And if that answer is yes, where hence after the bishop comes to d2? However, the move chosen by Fabiano has a very specific idea in mind. That very specific idea is that white wants to capture this bishop, and his intent is to play h3, g4, force the bishop back to g6, and then to capture the bishop on g6. So a very popular move, for example, is the move knight d7. And after the rather forcing variation h3, bishop back, g4, bishop back, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop g2. From white's point of view, white has won the two bishops. Maybe at some moment he might be inclined to play the move g5 followed by e4, trying to open this diagonal as well as his bishop on c1. Grandmaster practice has shown that in general, white's results from this exact position are favorable for white. Yeah. It's not the end of the story, of course, but that's what the Grandmaster practice has shown. So, bishop h5. This looks like a very sophisticated move, and in some ways it is. It basically says, okay, what are you going to do? Fabiano says, well, I'm going to take your knight. I'm going to play g4, and I'm going to take your bishop on h5. Mamedyarov has a very deserved reputation for ultra aggression. When you look up an aggressive chess grandmaster in the encyclopedia chess, there's his photo. h3 with the, so for example here, if we move our knight, after the move g4, we simply transpose into that variation I mentioned. Mamedyarov said, no, I'm going to play the move g5. And that was the reason I dropped back with my bishop, is now if you move your knight, for example, well, you're not going to win my bishop, and maybe I could double your pawns or maybe do something else. So g7, g5 was Mamedyarov's play. And Fabiano said, okay, I've wasted some time. I've moved my knight back and forth, but I've induced a serious weakness. If it's my turn, white intends to capture this pawn on g5. h7, h6, c4, c5. So what white is hoping is that he will force black to trade queens. By the way, any questions? Any questions so far? Does everything make a kind of a sense? It's flowing for you? In case of this trade, white would be very, very happy to make this trade, because although these pawns are doubled for the moment, white's intention is as simple as b4, b5, take and another b4, b5, and getting a very serious queenside initiative. Also, we still haven't given up on our idea of knight e5. Certainly, Shak had no intention of trading queens. It doesn't fit with his ultra aggressive style. He dropped back with queen c7. And now, from Shak's point of view, he says, okay, you provoked me into making a weakness with g5, but I provoked you, and if black is able to play b7, b6, that move c4, c5 may turn out to be a target for black's pieces. Bishop d3. With this move, bishop d3, what white's intention is to play g4, force the bishop back, trade bishops, creating doubled pawns here, play knight e5 or queen c2, attacking a pawn that would appear on the g6 square. Rook g8. Black's intention is to meet the move g4 with bishop back, trading bishops and recapturing with his rook. Queen c2. So white's intention with this move, queen c2, is any tickles with the move b7, b6, white intends to be able to defend his pawn on c5, or rather to support his pawn on c5 with a move like b2, b4. Knight b8, d7, everything has a flow. b4 setting up for just having an initiative in space on the queen side. Notice that white is intending to solve what his passive bishop is doing. What white is hoping is that black will prematurely advance in the center with the move e5. So for example, the move e5 here would be welcomed by white. After e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes e5, bishop b2. And notice that suddenly this bishop that really didn't have any effective influence in the game is suddenly on this beautiful diagonal. White already has a winning threat of knight c3, e4 with a discovered attack against black's queen. So e5 would be really a premature break, and instead bishop e7, bishop b2, and now Mami lived up to his reputation, and he struck out very boldly, very aggressively with the move g5, g4, which in a certain sense forces white onto the defensive, but in a higher sense really says that with this move g3, g4, I'm burning bridges. I'm playing very, very boldly for the attack, and that was his choice. Shak could have played, and arguably, as you will see the result of this game and what happened, perhaps he should have chose to be a little bit less bold and simply play bishop back to g6, so that on any trades, black, I think, has a more or less even position. Maybe I would prefer to play the white piece as a smidgen but nothing exceptional. However, g4 definitely did make for a very interesting game. And after h takes g4, rook takes g4, white has a problem. How on earth is he going to defend the pawn on g2? On the other hand, this rook on h1 is nicely positioned. It attacks this bishop on h5, and should it retreat, well, there's a pawn to be grubbed, and I do like grubbing pawns on the h6 square. But in the meanwhile, okay, white, figure out how you're going to defend against the move rook takes g2. How would the class defend against this capture?
My first instinct was g3.
Indeed. Austin says the first instinct is g3, and with this move g3, you might think to yourself, am I falling into a problem after rook takes g3, right? And you go, not too sure. If you take this rook, bishop takes is a very reasonable possibility, and this bishop attacks this rook on h1, and this pawn on g3 is under attack as well. And you might just have a little regrets that you're allowing your opponent this possibility, and in fact, g3, rook takes g3 works out well for black. So we have to find another move beside g3. Now, bishop f1 is a move we just have to shy away from for the very simple reason that, well, we're going backwards. We're going backwards. And that leaves king f1. And our first instinct is, well, we're not so pleased about the move king f1 because in the first place we move our king, we don't castle. But on the other hand, the more you look at the move king f1, the more you could become attracted to the idea. Simply put, within the absence of a pawn on g5, it suddenly becomes compelling for white to play knight e2, knight f4. There are a few defenders on the king's side. If things get really tough after castles and rook doubles up against this pawn on g2, why, there's a simple defense to be had in the move knight e1. So after we overcome our initial revulsion to the move king f1, we start to warm up to what it does. In the meanwhile, black's pieces aren't really that great. Like this bishop on h5, which is kind of scaring us, on the other hand, ties down this knight. Knight can't move, rook takes. If the bishop moves, well, we can grab this pawn as previously mentioned. And again, there are certain defects. This isn't a crystal clear attack that's going on for black. Nonetheless, Shak castled with the straightforward idea, I should say, of doubling up his rooks, and it's like, go, go, go. What are you going to do? So, knight c3, e2. The knight on c3 isn't particularly effective in terms of defending its king. Suddenly, it comes back to the square e2 with the idea that maybe it could go to f4 to attack this bishop. Maybe this knight will go to e5. Thanks to this bishop being open, we can stick a knight in the middle of the board. So ideas like knight e5, knight f4, or knight e5, knight g3. White has defensive ideas, and black has committed himself. Rook g8, and here we go, knight f4. Suddenly, when we see this knight making this beautiful transfer to the f4 square, we kind of get a little bit happier. More pieces defending white's king. If we can force the bishop to go back, well, we could take that bishop and take that pawn, or we could take that bishop, and take that pawn. If you go bishop back and after bishop takes, pawn takes, suddenly your rooks are cut off. Black really has no choice. He must sacrifice an exchange, and it scares the bejesus out of us when he does so. But Fabiano had seen and calculated a very clean refutation. At first sight and at first blush, I began to wonder about White's plan. First of all, we've seen these types of exchange sacrifices all the time in Sicilians. Just you put a rook on c8, you take a knight on c3, and you're a happy camper as Black. Why aren't you a happy camper here as well? Those triple pawn formation on the f4, f3, f2 squares, they seem like really, really nice targets. Queen takes f4, there goes one of them. Now the move king e2, and we start to ponder the issue for a moment. First of all, these pawns, as weak and as doubled as they are, they control some vital squares. They protect e3, g3, e4, g4. Furthermore, this pawn on f2 protects us against a check on the second rank. With this move king e2, furthermore, we're preparing to play the move queen d2, offering a trade of queens. Quite clearly, Black is not interested in trading queens, as that would see his attack seriously diminished. What to do? How to continue the attack? Don't all answer at once. Rook g2. You're channeling Mamedyarov. You bet. Rook g2, bringing that guy, hoping to be able to blast away. With this move, rook g2, we can see ideas of knight g4. We can see ideas of knight e4. We can see ideas of queen g3. And when you see those ideas as White, it's easy to panic. And this guy, Fabiano, not only is he a great attacker, he has nerves of steel. You've seen all of these attacking moves by Black. He drops back with the queen. He says, queen trade. Queen trade. You got no time to play knight g4 or knight e4, offering a trade of queens. What can Black play? Correct. Queen g3. I mean, there's no other reasonable move. If Black were to drop back with his queen, well, in the first place, I could probably chase away the rook, but after queen drops back, maybe White should just take this pawn with his rook on h6, and maybe it's White who's getting in some kind of attack against Black's king, hence the move queen g3. With the threat of rook or queen captures f2 check, winning. So what can White play? How are you going to defend that pawn on f2? What moves come to mind? Got to defend that pawn on f2. Cannot afford to see that pawn disappear. As I see it, there's only three reasonable moves. The first reasonable move is just to defend the pawn with the rook. But when you move the rook away from the h-file, after a move, for example, rook f1, then Black will quickly play knight to h5 and knight to f4 check to the king and gain threats. The second move that I think is most credible, let's put it that way, is the move queen e3. That certainly is a nice move. It protects the pawn f2. it keeps the h5, it keeps that knight honest. Now the knight can't really jump. We could take it. If the knight jumped here, we could take it. And it looks like white is, as we would say, consolidating, until you stop and think for a moment and go, oh my, what about the move e5? Should I be fearful that maybe, just maybe, black has some dangerous attack against my king, the knight coming here? I'm not saying that this is a dangerous attack against the king, but it's a type of opportunity that black is looking for. The third move, and the move that was chosen by Fabiano, is a clean, cold, killer defensive move.
Just
Queen f1 is the clean, cold defensive killer. Queen f1 protects the pawn on f2, but contains as well an insidious threat. What is white's threat after the move queen f1?
take the rook and then move the other rook over.
Yeah, exactly. If black makes a pausing move, for example, like h5, says I don't want to lose my h pawn, check this out. Queen takes, and that trade of queen for rook is now inevitable, and the entire attack for black stops. You trade off that queen on g3 and that rook on g2, and there's nothing, just absolutely cold-blooded, nothing, stone cold. So with this move queen f1, and realizing that, oh my gosh, queen takes g2, rook g1, I can resign, Mamedyarov had to reach into his bag of tricks and say, hey, I've invested my structure when I play g4, I've invested, oops, I beg your pardon, I have invested in exchange, there's no turning back. Knight g4. No turning back. With this move, black, of course, reinforces his attack against the f2 pawn, and white says, thank you very much, I'll have that one. Okay, so how to continue the attack? Queen takes g4 check, king over, queen f4 check, king back. Now, that little repetition is oftentimes made in tournament chess because you get a bonus of, let's say, 30 seconds or so for a repeating of the position. Now, with this move king e1, basically what white is saying is, hey, I'm now a rook ahead, and if it's my turn, my intention is to play the move, oops, excuse me, my intention is to play the move bishop on d3 to e2, driving you back further. I'm a rook ahead, do something. So, Shaq, true to his nature, let's keep it going, knight e5. Okay, with this move, black is heading for an opportunity to force white into a discover check by knight f3. And Fabiano said, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to play bishop to e2, attacking your queen. Now, if you jump with your knight to f3 check, in the first place I could probably just take it and play queen e2, or in the second place I could perhaps just simply move my king, and all your pieces are kind of boxed in and in a pin. Queen e4 was Shaq's move, king d1, bishop g5, doing his best to activate all of his pieces as much as he possibly can. And Fabiano said, thank you very much, I'll have that one too. I mean, just cold-bloodedly, just taking everything that black has on offer, and now white is a rook and a bishop to the good. Queen takes b5, a very scary move indeed, not just only with the threat of queen takes b2, but with the additional threat of checkmate in one move, queen d2. Fabiano says, I got a move that meets both threats. King c2 defends the bishop, and the secondly, after queen b d2 check, I'll slip away with my king, and thanks to my extra material, that is to say, I'm a bishop and a rook to the good, what are you going to do about it? Shak said, give me this pawn, and give me this pawn. So Fabiano said, well, that was okay with me. I give you back a couple of pawns, but in the meanwhile, my king is now, white's king is now in safety, and after queen d1, queen to e3, rook e1, there's basically no further threats that black can legitimately make against white's king. In the first place, he could just perhaps bring his bishop back, or in the next case, just play a4, rook a3, activating his rook, and thanks to his extra material of a rook and bishop, this is a winning position. And in fact, Shak gave up the ghost and he resigned. He might have continued a move or two further. For example, he might have wanted to play a move like queen d3, queen e4 check, bishop d3, queen e2, rook e2, blocking the threat along the second rank. And again, the material deficit of a rook and a bishop is simply too large. And so Shak resigned. A simple game? Yeah, that's the way it looks like. But at the board, to find all of those really excellent powerhouse defensive moves, including queen f1, and not to be intimidated by black's attack, it made a very powerful impression on me. This game did by Caruana. And furthermore, it's one of those games where I ask myself internally, where was white's mistake? I mean, white, there's not a single move in this game that I have an argument with. White played absolutely great. At every stage in this game, I think that white's play was superb. And that's why we say today, Fabiano Caruana is the toast of the chess world, the talk of the town. Pretty impressive. Any questions? Come on now, don't all shout out at once. But would you agree with me that this was an impressive game?
Most
like,
definitely.
most
That
definitely.
kind of defense is almost computer-like.
I know.
So precise. To overcome how nervous 99% of chess players would be in a position like that and not make a mistake.
Exactly.
It's impressive.
For the audience online, I was saying that the class is saying, you know, considering what pressure white's king is under, and the reality is 99%, and I'll even toss that in, of tournament players, never mind non-tournament players, 99% of tournament players would be worried, and to play so many precise moves at each and every stage of the game, you just sometimes, in the words of Joel Benjamin, you just got to tip your hat and say, well done. And that was really, really well done. And we're seeing why people are now saying that the matches of the future, and maybe the greatest rivalry in the modern chess, will be between Fabiano and Magnus. It certainly would appear that way after a game like this. So I thank you all for joining me on this beautiful day here in St. Louis, and what can I say? I'm looking forward to more victories of this type, where we just kind of take our breath away and go, wow, pretty cool. Thank you all.